think I can match the enthusiasm of Brooke or the governor quite, but we're going to make this a fun time here talking about the grid, and really appreciate y'all coming out, appreciate y'all coming to the summit and coming to talk about what is an intellectually challenging subject, but one that's very important. Fortunately, we've got two of the most knowledgeable policymakers around to come help educate us and to provide a lot of good information. First of all, before I get started with the panel, this is got to make the CLE announcement. This panel is CLE accredited, so if you're an attorney and you need CLE and would like to get credits for that, please be sure to sign the accreditation sheet in the back of the room. It's over there. Leah's got it, and we will submit it for you. If you're watching the panel virtually, you should be able to click a link or a QR code in the panel description online to request CLE credits. So for anyone that's online, go for that. But anyway, the disclosure out of the way now. Let's get to introducing our panelists. On the far left over here is Chairman Thomas Gleeson, the Public Utility Commission of Texas. Chairman Gleeson was appointed chairman by Governor Greg Abbott on January 19, 2024, so he's just over a year now that he's been the chairman. However, he has been at the Public Utility Commission for over 15 years in various roles. He previously was the executive director, which he'd held since December 2020, and prior to that was chief operating officer, director of finance administration, and fiscal project manager. So I can probably say there's very few people that understand all the workings of the PUC better than Chairman Gleeson. He is a graduate of the Governor's Executive Development Program at UT Austin and earned a Bachelor in Business Administration from Southwestern and a Master of Public Administration from the Bush School of Government and Public Service at Texas A&M University, so he's been all over the state. Mr. Gleeson Chairman Gleeson lives in Pflugerville with his wife, Alyssa, and their 3 sons. My next-door neighbor has three sons, and I can only imagine.
That was poor family planning on my
part. All right. To my immediate left here is Representative Charles Cunningham. He was elected in 2022 to represent House District 127, which is the Kingwood area, northeast Houston. I think we got some folks from that area over there. He has been a resident of that district for over 3 decades. Previously he's a U.S. Army veteran, but then also spent most of his career working for CenterPoint Energy, which is the transmission and distribution utility that serves the Houston area. So that's one of the major reasons why we invited him here, as he has decades of experience working in the utility business. He has played a role in several community organizations, including the Humble Area Assistance Ministries, Gulf Coast Area Association of School Boards, Kingwood Hospital Advisory, serves as a deacon at St. Mark's Missionary Baptist Church. I think as a lot of our speakers are saying at lunch, the great examples of public service up here. And that's what we really want to highlight that. He lives in Humble with his wife of 40 years, Stella, and they have 4 children and 9 grandchildren. That is also something else. I don't think I'll ever get that far. I got 2 little ones myself, and we might be done. That's a lot. So kudos to y'all for being great servants and also great families, so we love to support that. All right. So let's get to talking about the grid, and I'll start with obviously there's a lot going on in Washington D.C. with the change in administration and also new Congress. Of course, the federal energy subsidies are going to be a big topic of discussion among the Congress as they're debating the first reconciliation bill. It's being heavily discussed right now. And then there's also a lot going on within the administration to roll back rules, change rules, et cetera, all of which have a big impact on what we do with the grid in Texas. And so I just wanted to kind of open up for either one of you to start with, what are kind of 2-3 most important things that you think the Trump administration and Congress should address to help improve the affordability and reliability of electricity here in Texas?
Well, first of all, let me just say good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for not reading all of that bio. So I appreciate that. But as we in Texas look now, this is a good time for us now. We have a friend in the White House, and so when you ask what is, Dr. Bennett, when you ask what is it, one or two things, we would say one is the permitting, that we need to loosen some of the permitting requirements, especially with the NEPA. Make sure that Texas is, we are a business-friendly state, and so we need to loosen that and let them know that Texas is open for business. If you heard the president say that a couple things he was going to do was drill, baby, drill, that made me happy. We're looking to also have these businesses come in where we will also look to probably, Chairman Gleeson can probably chime in on this, make sure that we have the necessary power that's needed. Now, we're not just talking about wind and solar, but let's get with the, with the gas. Let's get with, I was here 3 years ago and I talked about nuclear. So I'm glad that the governor now is talking about that. And so we'll be, let's see what we can do now where, Texas is what we would call a state to do business in. And it starts at the federal level. So let's loosen those regulations, the permitting, and I think that's, for us, would be a good start.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with all that. I think what I would add is, now that the Trump administration is there, one of the areas that we're really looking to make a difference in is, as all these companies are looking to come to Texas and we're trying to ensure a reliable grid, a lot of them are willing to come with their own power. In the short term, a lot of times that means diesel backup generation, which has emissions with it. So, as the chairman of the PUC, I don't ever want to put a company in a position to have to make a decision. Do we want to help the reliability of the grid by using our backup generation, or do we need to not do that so we avoid an administrative penalty? There should not be a decision point between reliability and clean air. I understand no one is going to argue against clean air. All of us want clean air. But the reliability of the grid has to be paramount.
To the chairman's point, Senate Bill 6, as one of the lieutenant governor's priority bills, is directly trying to address that question of, especially with all the competing loads coming into Texas, how do we do that in a managed way? We don't want to discourage those businesses from coming, but we also need to make sure from a grid planning perspective that we can accommodate it appropriately and not put undue burdens on residents. So that debate is very front and center this session. I expect it will be for the next couple of years because that demand is not going away anytime soon. I always hear that the companies building the data centers always say if we could get more power, we would increase our top line by 20-30% if we just had more power. So the demand is absolutely there. Every time you do an AI search on your smartphone, that's 10 times what the amount of power that's required to do a Google search. So every time you use AI to ask the chatbot a question, it's 10 times more power than is required to do a regular Google search. So think about that multiplied millions and billions of times over. That's if we want to do that, then we are going to need the power to be able to supply it. So that's very important. Representative Cunningham, that's one issue that's being kicked around the legislature. Kind of discuss some of the other things that you're seeing. You could talk a little more about the transmission issues if you want, or anything that you kind of see as being important for the legislature to address this session.
Well, I've looked at some of the legislation that my colleagues are submitting, and there's over probably about 21 different bills that are kind of pertaining to the grid. But I will fall back and say, at least the legislature, we should be looking at one, supporting our Texas Energy Fund. And I won't put I will put a dollar number on it. We can start at $5 billion. Let's put it like that. Because what we need to do as a legislature is to support the PUC, support them in what they're doing with their plan, their resources. And we also need to make sure that we are not, and you kind of touched on it too, not anti-business. So we want to be open to the business. Now I have there's 3 pieces of legislation that I looked at that is interesting. One's by Representative Rosenthal. I'm trying to remember what it was. It's pertaining to grid reliability. Of course, you talked about Senator King and Senator Swartner with SB 6. There's also I know not Chairman, but Representative Kane has one that really relates to municipalities and how we address that. And there was one other that seems to leave me. But during the interim met, we went over HB 1500. There was also a bill from, I want to say, Will Metcalf that kind of outlines, I want to say it was 2555, correct me if I'm wrong. But those bills are looking and asking our area utilities to do what they can to strengthen grids, look at that nature. I think, as a matter of fact, submit a plan concerning vegetation, things of this nature. Last time I looked, I think there was only probably 3 that probably have submitted a plan, still waiting, and I forget what the timelines on that are. Chairman, you could probably help me with that. But those are some of the things that we're looking at, and that the legislature should be looking at. Just making sure that we're being supportive all the way around. One, a PUC, ERCOT, but also with with our TDSPs that are out there, or TDUs now. Let me get my acronyms right here.
Transmission, distribution utilities.
Right.
Like his former employer.
Right. And we'll talk about them later. I see that there's an Entergy folks. I actually have 2 of them in my district, Entergy and Centerpoint. But we will. I'm not going to talk too bad about Centerpoint, Robin. Anyway, but those are some of the things that we're looking at. So, like I said, over 20-some bills. 3 in particular, but we need to focus on making sure that we kind of find balance to work together with the PUC.
Yeah, and I would say just to touch a little more on the system resiliency plans that Representative Cunningham spoke of, where we've approved a couple. We're currently debating over the Texas-New Mexico Power System Resiliency Plan. That was really important legislation because in order to make the grid and these individual service territories resilient, it takes a lot of capital, takes a lot of money. And I understand why a company that would maybe be unsure if they were going to get to recover all those costs would want some indication that the commission believes that those investments are prudent on the front end. That makes a lot of sense to me. So I think that was really important legislation that passed last session. The other bill that I would just highlight this session, you brought up nuclear. Senator Tam Parker filed a bill on nuclear that really was born out of the governor asked the commission to look into how we can speed up small modular reactors in the state. My former colleague, Jimmy Glotfelty, former commissioner who left the commission at the end of December of last year, spearheaded that effort, put together an advanced nuclear working group that came up with a number of recommendations, I think 7 or 8, and the majority of those are actually encapsulated within Chairman Parker's bill. And so I think nuclear is another place where Texas can really lead. With the governor behind it, I know that the Senate and the House leadership and all the membership really cares about reliability. I think if you care about the environment and you care about a clean environment and you don't believe in nuclear, I don't think your maths, because there's too much load coming to this state to fix our issues through wind and solar and batteries. But I also don't know that I take you as really serious on the environment, because nuclear can work really well to meet our base load needs while being environmentally friendly. So I think there's a really good interplay there that Texas can lead on this issue if we make the investments, if we get the policies right. And I think small modular and even large utility scale nuclear at existing sites, growing those sites, will be really important to ensuring the reliability of this grid, not just right now, but on into the future. And I was really happy to see Chairman Parker file that bill.
Yeah, and I'll get to that in just a second. Actually, tomorrow, just a plug for our panel tomorrow, we are having a panel on kind of the national nuclear conversation. A couple folks coming in from out of state to talk about some of the things going on in D.C. and around the country on nuclear. So please do come to that panel if you're here tomorrow. But I wanted to go back to resiliency plans and also just kind of Representative Cunningham's experience in working for Centerpoint. Explain a little bit kind of what were the challenges that the utility faced with Hurricane Beryl and the derecho before that, and kind of how it's trying to, how we're trying to remedy that now, especially for some of the folks that are in the Houston area. How do we get into that, and how are we trying to get out of it now? I think it's I should say it's also a good example. It happened in Austin too, right? We had an ice storm a couple years ago. Austin Energy had a lot of vegetation management issues. This is a statewide issue of having to invest in the resiliency of the grid at the distribution level, because that's day to day. Most of the time, that's what happens to cause outages is wires and poles. It's not the power plants going out; it's the wires and poles. So it's a really important issue that I wanted to kind of draw on your expertise, is how we need to be addressing that.
Well, when we look at actually what happened, I mean, it was a number of factors. We can say Mother Nature did what she did, with the drought, with the rain, stuff that nature. But let's just go to the utility companies. Once you start cutting back on your maintenance, we'll say vegetation, tree trimming, because at one time when I did work for a company called CenterPoint, I'm plugging that in there, right? I'm former. I was actually over the tree trimming, and so we were on the cycle that we went around, trim trees, make sure that they were away. Of course, that was also a constant battle, because in my lovely area of Kingwood, we're the livable forest, and so we like our trees. But that's one issue when you start cutting back. The other issue is when you start cutting back on maintenance on certain things, when you wait for a storm before you fix it. All that adds up. And now that we've got a plan in place, we're giving the utilities opportunities now to let's get it right. So let's talk about Borough right quick. When I look at, like I said, and I'll just talk about at least my two utilities, Entergy and CenterPoint. Both of them pretty much almost got their service on about the same time, but what was the difference? Entergy was communicating to the customers. Customers want to know, how long am I going to be out? I don't want to have to keep calling to find out what's going on. Entergy had a plan. I mean, they were even informing me. And I mean, it's like, we're going to be out 10 days, 5 days, 7 days. We're working. CenterPoint, let's just call it like it is, basically said, you need to go and find out where the Whataburger's at. And then you can find out where your lights are at. But let's just put it this way. Communication is always key. Communication is key. My experience, one group communicated well, the other one didn't. I don't even know if they had good communication internally, because I can go to one of my mayors in one of my cities and says, I can't get a hold of anybody. Do you have a name and a number? So and I think all that's been rectified. CenterPoint has owned up to it. The chairman and I, we were there. And we heard some of the things that we couldn't believe we were hearing. But I think moving forward, they've owned up to that. And now, they're in the process of automating the system, putting in hurricane-resistant poles where need be. I'm not a fan of getting rid of all wood poles. I mean, I spent at least 15 of my 30-plus years climbing them, and I like wood. It makes it easy for the climb. But somebody says yes. But as we do that, and then of course, redundancy is a big concern. The area that we're in the Houston area is huge not only to the economic engine for Texas. It's huge. The Med Center, NASA. We look at all these places. So it's good. It's we need redundancy. One of the issues that we had in my area, we had a hospital. Of course, storm took it out, but I've got patients now that are on respirators. I got patients that need, so we're looking, how are we going to get it? Trying to get generators there. And so one of the things that I asked them, CenterPoint, to look at, especially for the hospital in my area, Kingwood, is let's look at a possible redundancy backfeed so that we don't have to address these issues. And so I know it's been years ago. I don't know. There was a lady you might remember, Deanne Walker. Deanne Walker worked at Centerpoint. I worked with her. We worked on our critical load project to identify critical facilities, from hospitals, governmental agencies, all of these things, first responders, things that needed to be on. And I think, Chairman, I asked you when we were in the meeting, had you ever looked at their list? And you was like, well, what list? And so get back to that. No, I'm just saying that this is the thing. This plan had always happened. I can't speak for Entergy, but I know when I was at Centerpoint, every May we did a hurricane drill to get prepared just in case we had a hurricane, to make sure everything was in order, make sure everybody was notified, we had the right numbers, made sure we know how to work the circuits, know how many crews were coming into the area with our mutual assistance, all of these things. So all I'm saying is something didn't happen with Borough, but I think now we're on the right path. I appreciate Chairman, CEO Wells owning up to it, and now let's make it right, because people's lives are at stake.
No, absolutely. And Chairman Gleeson, if you want to add anything to that, and I'll just point out to the audience that I think, you know, you don't really see it, but the primary role of the PUC is as a rate regulator. You know, we talk in this forum a lot about the policy-making role of the PUC, but a lot of their job is overseeing, you know, the Centerpoint and the other transmission utilities are all regulated. They have a set service area where they are the designated monopoly provider for that service area, and it's the job of the PUC to make sure that you know, to regulate rates and to also, you know, kind of oversee all of that. So it's a very important function of the PUC that we don't often see. And it also is true. We're not talking about water in this, but it's also true for overseeing water and the communications utilities. Same thing. That's the vast majority of their work, day-to-day work. So if you just wanted to add anything about, you know, the role the PUC is playing in this.
Yeah, well, first I'll say, since Representative Cunningham brought up Deanne Walker, former chair Deanne Walker, probably the most qualified person to ever hold the chairmanship at the PUC. You know, Beryl was interesting from my perspective because, you know, we did something at the PUC we hadn't done since the market opened, which is we held an open meeting, a commission held an open meeting in Houston. First one we had held in over 20 years outside of Austin. And the reason I want to do that is I wanted to hear directly from residents in Houston about what their experience was. And one of the takeaways, I think the biggest takeaway I had was I expected everyone to not only be upset about their service, whether that's during blue sky days or during hurricanes like Beryl, but I also expected them to be upset about their rates. They were upset about their rates, but not because they were too high. They were upset because they didn't feel they were getting value. And what we heard from one person after another was, we're happy to even pay higher rates if you give us the service that we're demanding. And as an economic regulator, that's really important for me to hear, because like I said, the investments in resilience that we're talking about are going to cost a lot of money. And knowing that residents are okay with that as long as they see the value proposition on the other side, that their power is not getting shut off because a gust of wind goes by, or when a hurricane does come, that's a Category 1 hurricane in Houston where we should expect hurricanes. The system is set up so that it is resilient enough to respond mostly to that without outages, but where there are outages, they can be brought back on very quickly. That was something we learned during Uri as well, was people understand when you have severe weather, infrastructure is going to fail. The communication and then the timeline to get it back on are what are paramount to people. And so that was really good for us to learn. I'd say the other thing that was really important to think about was, the city of Houston, rightfully so, was very upset with Centerpoint's performance. But one thing I think is important to remember is in the cases where we decide what rates are, all the different parties are arguing about basically how much money should be paid to the utility and who should pay it. Most of those groups try really hard to get that number as low as it can go. There was testimony from all those groups in that case to reduce vegetation management. I bet if you asked the people that they were representing after Beryl, if they wanted them advocating for that, they would have said no. So I think there also has to be buy-in from everyone that the goal should not be just to make rates as low as possible. The goal should be, what kind of level of service do we want? Then make sure we're paying just that amount of money to get that level of service, no more, no less. But the idea that we can just continue to not spend money on things like vegetation management, it just doesn't work. And the other thing I would say about that, the way it's set up, a utility has an incentive to move money away from vegetation management to its capital improvement projects. Chairwoman Colcourse has filed a bill this session that would make vegetation management just a pass-through. So there would be no incentive for a utility to reduce the amount there to spend any dollar that should have gone to vegetation management on some type of capital project, because that money will just be a pass-through. So I think that's a really good conceptual step to saying, we want you to spend whatever is reasonable, whatever you think is reasonable to ensure reliability from a vegetation management standpoint. So I'm really happy that she filed that bill.
We've talked about some of the past issues now. Let's kind of start to look ahead a little bit. And ERCOT's latest forecast, capacity management reserve report, came out last week and showed what we all have kind of heard about, which is that there's a lot of demand coming to Texas. Also, a lot of uncertainty about how much demand is coming to Texas, and and again, trying to manage that. That's what Senate Bill 6 is primarily about: is how do we manage that, and how do we plan for it appropriately. The issue on the flip side of that is, how do we meet that demand? You mentioned nuclear. The problem is that, I think the problem, and that one of the things that our group is really focused on, is that the interconnection queue, if you look, and also this is reflected in the report itself, is primarily solar and energy storage, right? So the idea being, so that seems to be what the market is incentivizing. So as much as we would like to see, as much as everyone says nuclear is great, well, that's not what the market is actually calling for. The market's saying we need more solar and batteries. So what's the disconnect there? What do you think is driving that, and how do we, let's discuss a little bit how we can kind of get at the issue of ensuring that we have the right balance of resources going forward, right?
Yeah, I'd say at a foundational level, the market as it stands today does not appropriately value reliability the way that it should. I think, and that's, what I spoke of earlier, from Uri for, the past 3.5 years, resource adequacy was kind of at front of mind. How do we address that? The commission did a lot of work and came up with what was the performance credit mechanism. And that was deemed, I think, maybe a bridge too far. That's something that we have shelved for the time being as we look to other ways to try to meet our resource adequacy goals that perhaps are more targeted, not as expensive, as we think about affordability. When I think about valuing, how we try to value reliability, you have federal incentives for certain resources that don't exist for others, and that's always going to be an issue when the government intervention. But my job is to try to find within the tools I have a way to try to mitigate those kind of incongruencies between different resources. And so ERCOT and the PUC are working to try to figure out a market design that works to incent that reliability. For me, that means more thermal dispatchable generation. You're right. I want to say right now, we know it won't all get built, but I think in the generation interconnection queue, there's about 150 gigs of solar and 150 gigs of batteries. That won't all get built, but that is a massive amount of solar.
For context, we have about 30 of solar right now. Yeah. So there's about 5 times as much in the queue as what currently exists.
And I will say, kind of the acute onset issue, we have a couple of hours in the summer where the sun goes down and the wind has not come up, where we have, concerns about reliability. We have kind of 2 times in the winter, the early morning. We're going to see tomorrow, ERCOT's now projecting we're going to hit an all-time winter peak tomorrow of somewhere between 81 and 83 gigs. When that sun comes up tomorrow, we'll be fine. But there will be a period before the sun comes up when everyone's waking up, turning their heaters on, their water heaters, everything, where we have concern about reliability in those hours, and then again at night. I will say solar and batteries work great to deal with just those few issues, but that's not the issue that I'm concerned with long term. with all these businesses and residents coming here because of the policies, Representative Cunningham talked about business-friendly environment that's bringing businesses and jobs here. We want that. We're going to have a base load generation issue that cannot be met with just wind and solar and batteries. That's just not realistic. I'm in a position where reliability kind of gets put at my foot every day. And so I'm not in the business of picking winners and losers. I want to set up a market that incents the outcomes I'm looking for. And the outcome I need right now is more thermal dispatchable generation, and that first means more gas-powered generation in the state.
Yeah, and I think it's it's incumbent upon us to recognize that this demand is coming within the next 5 years, and as much as we want to look to the future of nuclear, that's a next decade thing. So there's a time gap here, right? There's a gap in which we need, and I'll kind of add a little bit to the chairman's point that even as we have built more wind and solar, the demand for dispatchable generation is still going up because we have so much demand growth. We've set new what we call net load records, which is demand minus wind and solar. We've set new records in 23, and we're about to set a new winter record probably tomorrow, I think. So that is it just goes to show that yes, we still need dispatchable generation even as we build wind and solar, because we got to have and the issue that we try to address is what is the right cost balance there, right? Because we could pay to build as much of any type of generation as you want. You can build enough to satisfy the system requirements, but at what cost, right? And then if you do that, are you taking money from the needed resiliency, if you're spending so much money on generation, are you not spending enough on the other things that are needed to ensure reliability? The delivery system, weatherization, all the other things that are important. So I think that's the important thing to recognize is that this is fundamentally an issue of where we're investing our money. We wish we had a perfect free market system of electricity, but the fact is that we have to have the system that we have, and we haven't come up with a better one. Is we have to have government policy that drives those investments in the right direction. So I think that's what the chairman's talking about, trying to address. And Representative Cunningham, would you want to add anything to that, or what the chairman said?
I agree wholeheartedly with him, but I guess I would add, the word that we're looking for is balance. And so that's what we're going to need. You mentioned it. They're coming, and we have to find that proper balance, but at the same time, make sure that it's reliable, because our customers, our families, everybody, when they walk in the house and they flip that switch, they want the lights to come on. And so we already know, as you pointed out, the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. But I think that as we move in that direction, and I think as we move in that direction.
Questions in a second, Dana.
Yeah, we will. But I'll answer you right quick. I said it doesn't always, so it does sometimes. So, but as we continue to just kind of move that way, I think it's finding balance. It's the legislator working with the PUC to make sure that we're moving in the direction that we need to move in to address and tackle the challenges that lie ahead.
Yeah, and I was going to add something that maybe will address your question in part, which is, I feel like in this discussion a lot, there is a feeling of, in order for me to win, you have to be losing. I think it is fine, and I think this comes from all sides. I think it is fine to say renewables can be great because they bring costs down, but they bring their own set of challenges because they're variable in nature. How do we deal with that? Gas is great, but it can be more expensive. Those machines break. They're very complicated. Okay, that's its own set of issues. How do we deal with that? How do we firm it up? How do we back it up? I think if we can get beyond, any time that someone says something about wind being, unreliable, the wind coalition, goes on the attack. And anytime someone talks about, the thermal fleet was above what we would have expected for outages, so that's the problem. I don't think that really helps the conversation come to solutions. all these resources have their own issues. Some of them are more difficult to deal with operationally for ERCOT and for us than others. I will say, we have days where thermal outages are 5,000 megawatts above what we thought they would be. We have ways to mitigate that. I do find days where we have an expectation that wind is going to be 14,000 megawatts and it's come in at 1,400. That's more difficult to deal with. I think we can be honest about that and then talk about ways to mitigate those impacts while recognizing those renewables have been good for the state because they've driven costs down. You can definitely have a discussion around, has there been too much of a proliferation? Have we crossed a threshold where we can't really take on any more of the any more wind, say, until we get more thermal or until we get more solar with batteries to deal with those kind of hours I was talking about. Those are all really good policy discussions to have, but I think it's hard to have those honestly when everyone kind of backs into their corner and feels like if you are pointing out perhaps a deficiency with my resource, I have to go on the attack and go after your resource.
Hey, one last thing. Yeah, we got questions coming. Yeah. So one more question and then we'll get to the question of the audience, and we'll have about 20 minutes for audience questions, so we'll get to them. But yeah, so looking at the solution set, what are the levers that we can pull to incentivize more dispatchable generation without just throwing more taxpayer money at the issue, right? I mean, we have the energy fund, which is, I think everyone agrees in the legislature that it's designed to be a short-term solution to this gap. But what are some of the levers that we can pull? I'm not asking you to endorse anything, but just describe to the audience, what are some of the levers that might be pulled to kind of correct for that?
Yeah, and I'm happy to, again, not endorse, I guess, but I mean, I've talked about this publicly in testimony and speeches. Last session, the legislature, I think, as a replacement for our PCM, our performance credit mechanism, passed the DRRS, Ancillary Service Dispatchable Reliability Reserve Service, to inject more revenue into the market and do it in a very targeted way. The way the law is written, I think that revenue can also go to batteries. I've been very vocal in my testimony to both the House and the Senate that I believe right now I don't have an incentive problem when it comes to batteries. I have 150 gigs of batteries in the interconnection queue. I have an incentive problem for thermal dispatchable generation for the gas fleet. So my intention is to direct that, at least in its first iteration, just towards thermal resources. Again, that is a targeted way to get revenue to the resources that we're trying to incent. While I understand that the legislature passed a law that is broader than that, I think it's my job to then take that and promulgate rules that address the issues as I see them. And the way that this system works is if I've gotten it wrong, the legislature is not shy about telling me they'd like me to do something different and come behind and pass a different law. But I think that's our job at the commission, is to say, great, we have this new tool that's in statute. How do we direct it to achieve the outcomes that we think we need? And like I said, for that initially, and I know not everyone agrees with this, I believe that revenue should be targeted just at thermal dispatchable resources. And so that's one way that I think you can take the tools that we already have at our disposal and try to direct them to the outcomes you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and I think also one thing that I will put an advocacy point in, that not just ratepayers should be paying that, but wind and solar, the sources of variability should be paying for some of that too. Of course, we need the legislature to be a little firmer about that, so the chairman can make rules to that effect. But I think that's a key point too, is not just where the money is going, but also where it's coming from. It's not always just extra ratepayer or taxpayer dollars, kind of chasing our tail, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. It's something you and I have talked about kind of in our private conversations is, yes, as those variable resources are making ERCOT buy more ancillary services, driving up costs, I think there is a really good argument for looking at cost causation and applying those costs to the resources that are causing us to procure all of that additional power.
Okay, now go into questions. We'll go ahead and get Bernie here first, and then I'm going to go to kind of each side. So.
And as I assume these are all for the representative,
yeah.
Okay, they're for all three of you.
I have not been advised.
Okay.
I've learned how to say that.
A lot has been said about the incentives on demand side, or excuse me, supply side. And about demand side, what are some of the free market prescriptions you could have that don't require taxpayer dollars, that can be done by the private sector to control the demand side in very positive ways for all of us, such as inducing crypto miners to come to Texas and entering into variable usage contracts. So like, they're not going to be crypto mining tomorrow, but most of the rest of the time, when we don't have massive freezes, they will be.
Yeah, so one of the things, and there's legislation on this as well, is making, so if you use the example of crypto mining, making those controllable load resources so that when we think of crypto mining, what we've always been told is Bitcoiners are very price sensitive. So depending on what the price of Bitcoin is today, say it's $100,000, at a certain power price, they'll come off because it's not in their economic interest to continue to mine Bitcoin. We haven't always seen that to be the case. So one of the proposals out there is making those types of resources, which should be price responsive, controllable by ERCOT. So if we see ourselves potentially getting into a circumstance where we have really tight conditions, ERCOT can ramp those resources down to get the behavior that we think we should be seeing, but perhaps aren't. The other thing that I think we need to look at, and this is still in its infancy, is we have very aggressive demand response programs for our industrial customers. We don't for our residential customers. And one of the hard parts about that has always been you really have to have a lot of participation on the residential side to really make a meaningful difference. But now that we're not talking as much about resource adequacy and market design, that gives a lot more oxygen to the policy debate about these other things. And I think empowering residential customers to participate in those same programs, just because you maybe at the onset won't see the level of impact that you do from, say, a large, industrial facility, is not a good reason to not endeavor to start that process. And so, I think at this point, we can't just look at the supply side of the equation. You have to look at the demand side. And I don't think we're ever going to go wrong trying to empower residential customers to get those same economic incentives that industrial customers get.
There's one right, Carson? Oh, right there, yeah.
Okay, mine's going to be a bit of a speech because I've been fighting wind for a long time. And
we don't have much time, so
I know, but I don't understand
2 sentences,
why
please.
I think we need to obviously look at all alternatives, and there are many popping up that are much more efficient, less land intensive than wind, and there's so many problems with wind. Not just, you said it's cheaper. It's not. The subsidies are like so many times more than subsidies for oil and gas or anything else. And so that's the only reason. It's not a free market for wind. It's artificially held up. And it's not just, it's the impact, the environmental impact. We don't require environmental impact studies. It's no rules about adjacent to fence lines. It's just many, many things. And the darn...
Can you go ahead and ask the question? I'm sorry.
Why is wind being promoted still and destroying wild Texas and very important parts of the state that need to stay wild?
There you go. Good question. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so what I would say is if you look right now at the interconnection queue for generation ERCOT, wind is not a big part of it at all. So I would say wind has kind of seen its day, when back in like the late 2000s, early 2010s, when the competitive renewable energy zones, all that transmission was built really to serve wind up in the Panhandle and out west in areas where there's a lot of wind and not a lot of people, right? And I think one of the things we saw with that, one of the problems was initially that was projected to be, I think, about a $4.9 billion investment, ended up being closer to $8 billion to get all of that wind to the places where the people actually live to try to take advantage of it. Very long transmission lines, very contentious disputes over land and land use, and absolutely. And so, I think we've kind of moved beyond the idea that a lot more wind is going to come here. I think we've kind of seen wind hit its peak. As those resources start to get to the end of their useful life, it will be interesting to see if companies look to repower those facilities. There are some rules around, because we've seen such a large influx of renewables. ERCOT is in the process of passing rules for, and this is going to get hyper technical, so I won't talk about too long, for ride-through capabilities for those resources to be able to stay at frequency through issues on the grid. And so companies will have to kind of make a decision: is it worth putting investment into those types of facilities to extend their useful life, because they'll have to meet these new requirements, because those requirements rightfully weren't in place when those facilities were built, because no one, in all honesty, I don't think, and I wasn't a part of these conversations back then, no one saw the proliferation to this amount of renewables in this short amount of time that has actually come here.
If you have an answer to that, go ahead. If not, we're going to.
I was just going to say, I have to go to the Capitol, but I'm going to stick around. So if you have questions, I'm happy to stick around and answer some questions.
Another question? Yes.
I'd like to know what Texas has to do in order to maybe try out one of the first small modular nuclear instruments. I happen to know we have at least one company that's already marketing them and already has licensing for the state of Texas and is in contact with the governor. So what does our legislature have to do to make at least a test of one of those to get that into our grid?
Robin, I don't know the answer to that, but I will, and I'm going to lean on the chairman here. I think with the Department of Energy, they've already been doing permitting. I know there's one in Utah. I heard there was, and we have it here. But I think there you go. But I think one is already being fast tracked for down in the Corpus Christi area, if I believe, because we have out of the 90 nuclear plants we have, we only have 4 here in Texas. Okay, but this is going to be small nuclear, and look, I mean, even the waste is, we've refined it now that the waste is not a problem. And so DOE is fast tracking that. I don't know the exact name of the project, but I think it's outside of Corpus.
So I spoke at a nuclear panel at the Capitol last week. Rolls-Royce was there, who this is a large part of what they do now. It was unbeknownst to me until that. Rolls-Royce no longer builds cars. They build jet engines in nuclear facilities, and so which I had no idea about. And they said the biggest issues are supply chain, manufacturing issues, and basically de-risking the capital costs. Even small modular reactors have a very heavy upfront cost, and there's a lot of uncertainty around the kind of viability of nuclear right now commercially. And so one of the things, if you look at, like I said, Tam Parker's bill in the Senate, and you look at the Advanced Nuclear Working Group, those recommendations centered around getting a permitting officer in Texas so that people looking for permits for any of this have one person in Texas, one office they can go to help them with the feds to work on permitting. It talked about money for manufacturing, bringing that manufacturing to Texas so that we can control it better here. So you have a closed loop supply chain on that. And then finding ways for the government to partner with those companies to de-risk the initial capital costs. One of the things I heard was, really, to get anything going, you need $100 million. So some companies aren't obviously going to put that up. They're going to flow their capital where it needs to go. And so those are the types of things that you can see in the report that the PUC put out and in that legislation to talk through what does that look like. Because obviously the government has a role in that to find ways to partner with the private industry if hurdles like that are keeping an industry like nuclear from taking off in the state. Because again, I think we can lead on this. The governor wants to do this. I think the House and Senate have shown, that they are very supportive of making Texas a leader in this country and in the world, honestly, getting this going. And I think we're uniquely situated because different than the rest of the country, the amount of energy demand in this state requires us to do something like small modular or even utility scale nuclear at the plants that we already have additional pads where we can put additional nuclear facilities once we get the permitting right. And so, again, my hope, similar to what I said about the environmental impacts with diesel backup generation, with this new administration, we can make a lot of headway in the next couple of years to get this going quickly in the state.
Yeah, back there. Make sure to get some folks in the back.
We'll be a little critical and a little observational. One, the reason that we have such a strong wind component is back in 1999 and 1920, when I was in the legislature, when we deregulated electricity, we required them to have a certain percentage of renewable energy. That was a requirement by the state legislature. That's what got the ball rolling. Now, I think that ERCOT is a failure in regards to being evangelical on an old, tired, wrong electrical system of batteries, wind, and solar. I have a ranch in the Panhandle, and I went all in for solar because I don't even have an electrical line within 4 miles, and I had to, and it's failed. I had to use generators behind it. I believe that if you all would be evangelical on nuclear, just like this woman says, it would sweep the country and the state. And you're not doing it. You're ignoring it in public.
Can you finish with a question, sir, real quick? That's my question. Oh, okay. Why? Oh, why can't? Okay. Okay. Their panel tomorrow, actually. That's why. So yes, that will be addressed tomorrow afternoon. Yeah, it's just about the grid. You're over there. Okay.
Yeah, it's a question.
Questions, please. That's we can save the statements for later. Yeah.
Everyone wants to throw everyone's taxpayer money around, but and it seems people have strong feelings about certain types of energy that we should be producing. Do we need to incentivize that nuclear or gas energy to kind of combat? Where's the funding from the solar and the wind coming from? Is that the federal government that's coming from? And then we need Texas tax dollars to incentivize the right type of energy that works here?
So I don't know that you need Texas tax dollars. I think, like I said, the goal for us is with, because I don't do tax policy, right? But like I said, we have tools that we can direct just to those other resources to try to balance that equation out. And I think that's an appropriate thing for us to look at doing, because again, I care about reliability. Right? And so if we can take the existing revenues that are in the market, which right now are getting spread, and direct those to, say, a gas generator as opposed to a different type of resource like a battery, I think that's an appropriate discussion for us to have at the commission and ultimately make that decision within the parameters of the law, right? Like as we always say, we're creatures of statute. We are not going to go beyond what the statute allows us to do. And every 2 years when the legislature comes in, if we need additional authority to do the things that we want to do, it's incumbent on us to then go tell the legislature what we need and have that go through a legislative process. But I don't, like the Texas Energy Fund took those tax dollars, $10 billion, to direct that just at gas generation. $7.2 billion of that $10 billion is just for gas generation, thermal dispatchable gas generation inside of ERCOT to incent 10,000 new megawatts. And then on top of that, buying down kind of that interest rate and giving them low interest loans, giving them completion bonuses, because it's not just enough to start building it. We need you to build it and get it online now, right? So there are incentives in that bill that if you come online in 2027, 2026, 2029, you get additional money as a completion bonus. And that was, that bill was filed late last session. The latest, in my experience, a bill has ever been filed May 1st, well past the filing deadline, by Chairman Schwartner, and flew through the legislative process, I think, because the governor and the legislature recognized that we need to do things to incent thermal dispatchable generation to combat the incentives that we see from the federal entities on the other side of that. And
I'll add to the chairman's point that I think everyone agrees that we can't do that forever, that we need to, if the subsidies for wind and solar are going to continue, we have to do something about that and making sure that the market is correcting for that, so we're not just infusing taxpayer dollars constantly chasing our tails. So I think that's that is what we're doing in the short term, but long term we've got to rectify the situation at the federal level and also do what we need to ensure that our market is incentivizing the right type of generation within the market, not just
Yeah, because again, it's the people's money, right? And I understand that it seemed appropriate. The voters voted to authorize that $10 billion, but that shouldn't have to be the solution. The goal should be to get a level playing field and then let the market work. And if you've set up the right market incentives for the outcomes you're looking for, that should work perfectly. I know that's, when we have our system of, federal and state, there are going to be different incentives and we're going to have to deal with that. But at the end of the day, it shouldn't take something like the energy fund to have to be re-upped over and over again to continue to infuse money, public money, into private corporations in order to get that generation build that we need.
Carson, right there. Oh yeah, Gideon's got the mic there. Yeah.
Yeah, kind of tangential. Where does the money come from? Is there an opportunity to reimagine some of the ancillary payment procurements and look at, hey, these were all well-intentioned, maybe like an ERS program that, of course, well-intentioned, but instead of that going to load, which doesn't need it anymore, but to start thinking about, hey, can we reallocate these to some generation with duration? Is that maybe a source of revenue with some of the ancillary payments?
Yeah, I think discussions like that are exactly what I'm talking about. We have a set of tools that we're authorized to use, and I think it's our job to see at a normal iteration if those are still working the way we think they should and if they need to be tweaked and focused elsewhere. And of course, that has to go through a collaborative process, right? That's not something we command and control. We have our processes, ERCOT has their processes, so that everyone has a voice, and hopefully that ends up with the best policy. But yes, that's exactly what we're talking about. We have a lot of tools at our disposal, and we have to kind of have a loop of reviewing those and analyzing to make sure they're still helping us achieve the outcomes we're looking for.
All right, we got Mike over here, and then we got about 5 or 7 minutes more for questions after this.
Lots of great things. I'll be short and sweet. So all of the discussion so far has been about future, although Thomas did a good job of identifying that we do have an existing fleet, okay? And, it's great news that we weren't next door, because where we were next door 4 years ago was literally 2 weeks before Uri. And the panel discussion, and that discussion was, we just lost a bunch of dispatchable generation out of our grid. And that was a material part of why we had what we had. I will tell you, projects all over the country, there's a 6, now 7, 8, 9 year backlog on turbines. It'll take us 6, 7, 8, 9 years to locate SMRs just on supply chain. You've hit on it. It is an emergency. If the Department of Energy were to declare an emergency and put a moratorium on retirements, what were your thoughts about that? No official Texas position, just thoughts about what do you think about the concept that we can't let anything else retire without a replacement capacity in place, if they could get out of it that way?
Yeah, so, I'm definitely in favor of that, right? We have something like that in ERCOT, reliability must run, where they have to come in and say that they're going to come off and have to be allowed to come off. So I think if reliability is an issue, those are definitely things that we need to consider, because, again, I understand, they're public utilities. These are, folks that they could have decided to go into the business of, building some widgets or watches or anything else. They decided to go into electricity generation and delivery, which is different. You have a different responsibility. So no, I absolutely think that we have to use the ability that we have in ERCOT. And if a resource is asking to retire and it can't, we're dealing with this right now in the San Antonio area, an issue that we're dealing with and trying to come up with a less expensive way to meet that demand. But that's the process we went through, where CPS Energy said that they were going to retire some units earlier than they had initially indicated. And Mike, you know this. And we went through our process and hopefully have found a less expensive way to meet that demand. I think things like that are obviously considerations that we have to have now and going forward to ensure reliability.
Carson, one of these gentlemen all here have been raising their hands for a long time.
All right,
So
this is going to have
one.
to be the last question here, all right?
Yeah, we got 2 minutes left, so one or two quick ones.
Hi, this is Ben Woosley from the American Conservation Coalition. We, when we talk about stability of the grid, it seems like we're really talking about negative externalities of the subsidies, negative externalities of the particular aspects of these energy sources. Why not use a direct, like Pigovian tax, to correct that externality and then reallocate those funds to sources that don't have those externalities? That way we can drive towards energy abundance while also retiring some of our most problematic energy sources, like, for example, coal, which is a heavy emitter of heavy metals and other things. So let's do nuclear and gas instead, right? Anyway, so why not treat them as negative externalities, apply a Pigovian tax? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, sorry.
All right, everyone, I'm going to have to tell you,
Hold on.
we are a live stream right now, so we can't hear the question on the stream. So
Yeah.
if we could please answer
I'll re-ask it, and this will be the last question. The question was, what is kind of the opportunity cost for not having enough power? And I think this speaks to, also, the cost of Uri was not just the cost of lost power, but also all the economic damage that goes into that. So explain kind of how that's done at a policy level.
So I don't, to your actual question, I don't know that anyone has calculated businesses that have gone elsewhere and what that has cost the state in terms of jobs or tax revenue. I don't know. What I can say is when we're thinking, like one of the things I said we're dealing with at the agency right now is transmission. We have to have enough transmission to get the power where it needs to go. That is when I talk to businesses, when I talk to hyperscalers, when I talk to other industrial facilities, that's one of their major concerns is, even if you get the generation here, can I get it to where I'm actually locating my facility? And so those are absolutely considerations when we're trying to decide between, do we, in this case, level up to a 765 transmission system from what we've had historically, a 345. What are the costs? Because it could be more expensive. It's projected to be more expensive, but costs are just a point in time, right? Because over the next 5 years, maybe it's going to cost $2 or $3 billion more. But to your point, the lost economics of businesses locating elsewhere and bringing those jobs elsewhere. The idea that if I don't level up to that 765, 3, 5, 7, 10 years from now, do I just have to come back around because I didn't do the initial investment that I should have? Those are absolutely considerations that we have at the commission, and I know the legislature considers when it's looking about what policies to pass as statutes.
Well, that is all the time we have. Thanks, y'all, for coming. Sorry we couldn't get to all the questions, but we've got other programs coming up after this. So please get yourself out to the foyer and get on to our next programming. And we will have a panel tomorrow on nuclear for all those nuclear questions. Great panelists tomorrow for that. Thank you.